All right, guys. So I definitely had to put this video out after the 2 podcasts with Ray Cronise. I haven't decided if I'm going to put this before the second one or afterwards, but I'm just kind of addressing what was mentioned in there because there were a ton of comments. I think probably the most comments I've ever had on a video afterwards. So I wanted to address some of the questions people brought up, the concerns about what was being said. So I'm going to go into that all here. So I think if you listen to the whole interview, there are going to be parts of it that are really going to jump out to people, especially if you watch a lot of my content, a lot of people who put out similar content to me. The biggest question I think that people had was, how is this guy advising against no exercise at certain times? And I definitely felt the same way. Some of the things he says are a little more controversial, like the rate of weight loss, some things with cold therapy, but I think the exercise component was the biggest part. So I'm going to first touch on some of the things I do agree with and then touch on what I don't agree with as much. And so I think in terms of what he said with rapid weight loss, I think the average person can lose weight a lot faster than just 1 or even 2 pounds per week. I think that it certainly can be done. I think that if you take somebody who's out of shape, especially if they haven't been working out very long, they can lose a lot of fat very quickly and maintain most of their muscle mass. And if they haven't, lifted before previously, they might even be able to gain a little bit of muscle mass. But just because it can be done, in my opinion at least, doesn't mean that it should be done and doesn't mean that it's completely sustainable. Now, there is some research showing that people who have rapid weight loss to begin with can be more motivated long term. They see that weight loss and then they are motivated, and so they stick to the diet longer than somebody who has a very conservative approach. However, most of the people watching this are going to have somewhat of a background with lifting, whether you've competed or not, maybe not, but with some lifting background. And in most cases, I do think 1 to 2 pounds a week is great. A lot of the times people will say 1% of your body weight. I think that's a very fair rate of weight loss. And I know some people commented how he said, oh, who wants to lose 2 pounds a week? I mean, most of us, if we're doing maybe like bulking and cutting cycles, we're losing 10, 20, maybe 30 pounds. I mean, you're not talking an exceptionally long period of time. You're talking a few months, which is, I think, very reasonable. I think there are certainly tons of anecdote, and I believe some studies showing that a slower rate of weight gain will maintain more muscle. I mean, certainly tons of anecdote out there. I mean, if you look at one example of Jeff Alberts, he competed at the same weight for many, many years after he was already like 20 years into lifting. And then soon after that, he was competing almost 10 pounds heavier. And he says himself, he certainly did not gain 10 pounds of muscle, but he got a lot better at dieting, structuring refeeds, going into with a slower approach. So I can't really get behind super rapid weight loss for somebody who is, again, if you're talking about competing and getting like low single digit body fat. But if you have somebody who is 30% body fat, yes, I think they can get to 20% body fat fairly rapidly. You have Lyle McDonald's Protein Sparing Modified Fast in the Rapid Fat Loss book. I think that's a good way to do it. Having done it myself a couple times and having friends who have done it a couple times, I still think you lose strength certainly relatively quickly, depending on how you do it, your experience level. It will come back. At the end of the day, is it better than just doing it slower? I think that's going to depend on the individual. I think also a big thing you have to consider here is somebody's eating habits and eating patterns. If you have a history of binging and purging or anorexia or even like unhealthy relationships with food, I think that if you're doing really low calorie diets or fasting, that can lead to some problems. And again, it's not an issue with the fasting itself or even the low calories itself, but you might not mentally be ready to do that. And that is going to be an issue also just with rapid weight loss in general. Are you just trying to get, are you really just trying to lose weight rapidly, or are you trying to make this a lifestyle that you can sustain? Because sustaining is a huge part. Now, I know Ray does, of course, know that. One of his comments is that his clients have kept the weight off, and that's great. Again, I don't want to also speak for Ray entirely here. He and I have been talking a little bit privately. I don't want to put words in his mouth. Maybe at some point we can get him on to kind of clarify his points. So I definitely don't want this to come across as like me completely bashing him. I know that he's not making as outlandish claims as some people might think. He's also a good guy from everything that I can tell. I know some people in the comments were pretty negative on him, even from like an ethical standpoint. And I think, at least to me, he seems like a nice guy. So I would say try to be objective in your remarks and maybe not like bash the guy, because a lot of what he says is legitimate, and he has done a lot of research on his own and collected a lot of data, and that I can respect compared to somebody who is just, really just speaking with no experience at all or research. However, going back to the sustainability thing, what I wanted to comment on is that not only can slower weight loss lead to better sustainability, but you also have to consider that most studies show that exercise leads to more sustainability. And so he is right that people who exercise do not lose weight much faster than people who don't exercise. It is largely going to be diet, and that has been shown. And just as an example that he gave, I mean, how many calories can you burn doing cardio compared to just taking it away? For most people, it's a lot easier to a point to just take the calories away. You're really not going to burn that many calories. And as he's pointed out, Eric Helms pointed out, I thought about this and talked about this years ago, it's not just the calories you burn. You might burn 300 calories on the treadmill, but how does that compare to how many calories you would have burned if you were just sitting there? So you might only, maybe it was 200 calories that you burned over what you would have already burned just sitting around. So that's something to consider too. Exercise is not really going to burn that many calories in most cases, but I still think it's definitely something that you should do. Now, I would really like to see his DEXA scans where he says that he didn't really lose much muscle. I know that there are studies showing where people have, they're just in bed rest basically, and they atrophy like crazy. Now, he's not suggesting to literally not move. He does advise doing normal activities. One point that he brought up that, to be honest, it's not something I can really comment on. He says that people who lose weight, if they're just doing it at a regular rate, he says that it's not severe enough to kick in the body's, conservation mechanisms. Now, like I said, that's really not something I can comment on. I'd have to look more into that, but it's not something I've really ever heard much about. I do think that people who have extremely low calories do lose more muscle. And without exercise, his argument is, why would you want to do something that's going to break down tissue if you don't have the calories to repair it? And I think that's one of those things that when you say it, it can make sense, but I still think that it's giving your body a reason to hold on to that muscle. I mean, I don't personally think very debatable that you're going to maintain more muscle if you work out. One of the classic studies that I'm thinking of is I think there were two sets of obese women, and they lost weight, and they both lost weight at a similar rate whether or not they exercise, but the group that exercised maintained much more muscle. Now, I brought this up in the interview, and he had said that no, they don't maintain more muscle, but they're just holding on to more water. To which I would say, and I tried to say this in the interview, but we didn't completely finish everything. If they both lost 20 pounds, and you're saying that the group that worked out had, let's say, another 4 pounds of water, okay, fair enough, but that would mean then that they lost 4 pounds more fat, presumably. If the study shows that they maintain more fat-free mass, even if you're saying that that includes water, the other weight has to come from somewhere, right? These studies are still measuring fat mass. So whatever you want to say the fat-free mass is, there's still more of it, and therefore there's less fat. And so they definitely do maintain more of that fat-free mass and lose more fat. I mean, that's been shown pretty clearly. The only argument I've seen him give for that is saying that, who cares, the weight loss is so slow. These studies don't matter because you're talking about 1 to 2 pounds of weight loss per week, and that's not significant. I have people lose, 5 pounds, 6 pounds in a week, so that's more important. Again, I think people can definitely lose fat more rapidly than is traditionally done. I don't know if that's necessarily the best option. You have to know somebody's background, how they're going to maintain that, and all of that. I think I have to see a lot more evidence that muscle would not be lost without exercise. I currently have not seen anything to persuade me of that. So on the whole, just kind of recapping, currently I agree with a lot of his points. I do think a generally plant-focused diet is very healthy. There's obviously a lot of benefits to fruits and vegetables. I don't personally think meat is an issue. I think the evidence is pretty clear that people who eat meat, as long as they're health conscious on the whole, live just as long as vegans. I think there could be problems with vegan diets too. I'm really not trying to get into a debate here versus meat versus non-meat. I just wanted to kind of elaborate my thoughts there because I feel like I didn't quite get all that out during the podcast, and I know those people are going to wonder, if this guy's on my podcast, am I agreeing with everything he says? No, but I also do agree with some of what he says. And so I'd also like to hear from you guys. Do you like to have guests on with maybe different views? Because in the evidence-based community, there's really only so many people that I can interview. I really do enjoy interviewing them, but I also like to branch out for my own interest, but also because I think it would be interesting to you guys to hear different perspectives. You know, just because somebody doesn't say 100% of what we agree in, I don't necessarily think means that we should shun them. You know, they might have something really valuable to say on other areas, or just in general. There might be things that we can pick from that and try out. I think fasting, for instance, is a very interesting topic. So maybe if somebody wants to try that, they can look to him to say, okay, well, hey, I want to try a week-long fast. What would be the best way to go about that? But tell me, I mean, I would like to hear feedback if you guys like these types of guests, and not just, you know, Ray, but other people who are maybe a little bit outside of the fitness community, where they're maybe more focused on health or other things like that. Personally, I find it interesting, so I probably will to some extent continue to interview people like that. But of course, I don't want to have people on who are not evidence-based in the least, or just saying things that I completely disagree with in all areas. You know, if there's maybe one point we disagree with or something, but obviously I'm not going to have people on who I just completely disagree with. But I'd like to hear you guys' feedback on this video here, on the videos with Ray in general, and then future content that you think would be interesting to see.